Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, June 25th, 2025, and today we are going to be joined by Catt Fields White of Farmer Market Pros and the Tent Talk podcast, which is excellent, to talk about the current state of farmers markets, how farmers markets work as a business, and the tensions sometimes between markets and municipalities, market members, all the things. So let's do it. Catt Fields White, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for coming on. I'm super excited to have this chat. I love your podcast, and we will make sure to link everybody to it in the show notes. But maybe just to give us a little bit about your background, where you are, what you do, those sorts of things.
Sure. I'm actually bi-coastal at this point. I'm based in both San Diego, California, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So two places that could not be too much more different, given that they're both in the U.S. I started out in the food business doing marketing for restaurants. I ended up owning a restaurant at one point for a few years. I worked in a construction company that only built restaurants. So there's a theme here, serial entrepreneurship, but always with food in mind. And then 18 years ago, I started a farmer's market in Little Italy. I had moved to a very urban neighborhood in San Diego. I could do anything I wanted to on foot except shop for groceries. Tons of restaurants, no grocery stores in the area.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, man does not live by calzone alone. So we needed some fresh vegetables. We needed some things in the neighborhood. So I talked to the local business improvement district there, and they loved the idea, though they didn't want to fund it. I said, I'll do it on spec. We'll end up, I can probably raise some money for the association if it works out. If not, no harm done. We'll walk away. So started that in Little Italy, which is a downtown neighborhood in San Diego. We started with, I think we had 35 booths the first day. The highlight of my day was shooting pictures of empty boxes behind tables at the end of the day. So it was clear that our neighbors also wanted fresh food in the neighborhood. The farmers were very happy, even though they were skeptical about coming into a really urban area at first. And nowadays, that market stretches over 6 city blocks. We have 210 tents or so on the street. On any given Saturday, 22,000 some visitors. Those farmers are selling a lot. We also have food makers, grocery folks, people selling hot food, and a smattering of crafters that pays a lot more than the farmers in order to subsidize the farmers' rent.
Interesting. Yeah, that may actually come up a little bit later. Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is you have your hand in a lot of these things, and you also have a good understanding of farmers markets kind of around the country. You talk to a lot of these people. Can you talk about what you see as sort of the current state of farmers markets? I know with funding and grants and those things have been tough for some markets, but with the season in swing, like how are markets faring right now? Those sorts of things?
So the business at farmers markets in terms of sales for farmers and our local food maker producers is really good. Currently, that Little Italy market and the other markets that I've developed and operated in San Diego are being run by my daughter, who's the next generation of farmers market managers. And I concentrate on farmers market pros. We do have a podcast, as you mentioned, that's weekly. We have an online private Facebook group that's very, very active. We host a conference once a year for farmers market managers, farmers, and participants. So I do talk to folks in a lot of the country about what's going on. And it seems to be pretty consistent that the farmers are doing well, the food makers are doing well. Grocery store prices in those big box stores have gone up for a lot of different reasons. Farmers and food makers have tended to kind of hold the line. They've been good about not gouging or anything. As eggs have gone up in the grocery store, they're still charging what they've always charged for eggs. So we're actually seeing better business than we ever have at the farmers markets right now around the country. Now, the tricky thing is when you mention federal funding and what a interesting thing that has been this year is that a lot of farmers markets are operated by organizations that also do things like nutrition incentive programs, and they do cooking lessons for people to teach them how to eat healthy. And they go into schools and provide people with bonus bucks that they can use at the farmers market that give them more purchasing power if they're on SNAP or, what used to be called food stamps. Those programs aren't typically able to be funded just by vendor fees or small sponsorships. Those oftentimes come from Farmers Market Promotion Program grants from the USDA. And that's what's had a huge interruption this year. So a lot of the nonprofits that are in the business of operating farmers markets are really struggling, partly because they don't have the grant funding, but even more because instead of saying, hey, we're going to discontinue this grant and in 2 years you won't be able to get that, instead the government said, hey, we have a contract with you, you've spent money, you're getting ready to submit for reimbursement, and we've decided we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, that makes things very tough. There's like you said, there's also all these different things that farmers markets are doing and farmers market managers are doing that are not necessarily as obvious, right? When you just think of a farmers market, you mentioned like there's like double dollars programs, and like you said, going to the schools, all the marketing and those sorts of things. Like if the farmers were having to pay for all of that as well, or the community was having to pay for all of that as well, it would be significantly more difficult to operate that way, I guess.
Right, exactly. You can charge farmers and food makers and maybe throw a few crafters in and make that a break even, at least, proposition for operating a farmer's market. There's enough there to pay a market manager that is dedicated to all the regulatory things that we have to do and the marketing and writing those newsletters and all that good stuff. But when you get into more outreach and more programs that are benefiting your community, that takes some extra dollars from somewhere.
Yeah, and I also think about like the market managers I've known have support, helpers that are often paid by these federal funds and, these other programs. And they are still, even with that help, borderline like overworked, if not completely overworked. Like they do so much, certainly during the season and even in the off season. So I'm just thinking like in terms of the market manager, has that increased the difficulty level, or what are you seeing in terms of that?
Yeah, probably so. We had a lot of market managers that frankly burned out or had been coming up on retirement age, but accelerated that during pandemic protocols. Because during COVID-19, it became much more expensive to run a farmer's market. Oftentimes you weren't allowed to have anything but farmers. You had to fence in the markets, count people in and out. There were a lot of things that had to be done. And it was very stressful because, of course, in our country, we got a lot of division of opinion on whether any of that was necessary. And you had people that were hostile about the fact that our city required us to make them wear masks. And so farmers market managers and assistants who didn't really sign up to be policing people. That wasn't the kind of job we did. We're more of a marketing and organization function. We're under a lot of stress. So we saw a lot of people leave. We've seen a lot of new managers come in. We've understood more, I think, as an industry that farmers market management is a full-time job. We're going to print t-shirts one day that say, what do you do the other 6 days? Just to laugh about it, because people seem to think that you just show up and it happens. But it is a full-time job, and we are campaigning to make sure that farmers market managers get paid like any other operations manager would for a grocery store or for a marketing agency. And I think there's a little bit of a struggle with that right now. There's still a lot of folks that think that, farmers markets are cute and this should be done by volunteers, and why would anybody get paid to do this? And so I think there's still some educating to do in terms of making people understand that farmers markets don't just happen, as the hashtag goes.
That's great. And I think that's a good spot for us to take a quick break, because when we come back, we're going to detail a little bit more about that sort of day in the life of the market thing. Be right
Perfect.
back. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe. But what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right. I think the work of a market manager, like you mentioned, it's often overlooked in conversations about market farming. And I'm hoping maybe you could illuminate a little bit more what the day in the life is and discuss some of the duties of the market manager, some of the unique challenges and some of those, what they're doing those other 6 days, that sort of stuff.
Sure, love to. So, if you want to talk about the day in the life, that day typically starts at least 24 hours before the market. You're sending out your email newsletter for the week. You're double checking on who's going to be attending and who's not. Most of the markets that we've operated, part of the deal is if you sign up to be at that market, you're going to show up every week because the shoppers who come out with eggs on their shopping list and find that the farmer that has eggs isn't there are disappointed. They'll need to go drive to another grocery store. They may find out it's easier to park there. We'll see if we get them back next week. So we usually count on consistent attendance, but life happens. We need to check in with the farmers and make sure they haven't had a severe weather indicator that means that they can't get down the road to the market. We need to take into account that everybody has a wedding now and again, or a kid graduating, or somebody gets sick. So we're looking at who's going to be at the market that particular week. We're checking our files to make sure that neither their permits nor their insurance have expired, because we need to verify that those are in place for this week. And then we need to get onboarding instructions out and setup instructions out to any new farmer or vendor that's going to join us that week. So that's what's happening the night before. We're putting all that on a map so that we make sure that the farmers and vendors are placed in the best location for each of them, one that's going to be compatible with their neighbors, one that's going to get the proper amount of attention from shoppers. We usually try to organize that into kind of departments, because if you're shopping in the grocery store, you don't expect to find produce next to jam or eggs next to, say, soap. So we're going to arrange those folks at the market so that all the farmers are together and all the sort of a hygiene and body care things are together and all the granola and the jam is together. So we've rearranged our map. We get there very early. For instance, the market in San Diego, that's the one that I ran for the longest, starts at 8 in the morning. It means we're there at 5. So at 5 o'clock, we have to check and see if there are cars on the street. If there are cars on the street, we need to notify the police department, who will come out, write a ticket, authorize a tow the cars off the street. Meanwhile, we may or may not have a farmer or vendor standing there with tents and produce on the back of their truck waiting to set up while that car is sitting in their space. Once we get rid of those, we put barricades into place softly, enough that the farmers and vendors can get in, but hopefully not so that anybody else can come in and mess with them while they're setting up. At the last minute, maybe somebody got sick that morning, so we've got to quickly rework the map and move people around so that the gaps aren't too big between tents. We direct farmers and vendors to their spaces. We manage any confusion or concerns. That usually comes up mostly if somebody who should be there early because they've got a really big load gets there later and is stuck in traffic and doesn't have the traffic on the street to unload. So we're working with those kind of things, making sure everybody remains calm while they're frantically setting up. We check the booths to make sure that what's in the booth is what's on the application and the certificate, because we're legally not allowed to let people sell in California anything that they don't grow. So we need to make sure that they haven't picked up produce from a neighboring farm, or worst of all, that somebody has thought that it's okay to go to Costco and buy grapefruit because they grow grapefruit and they don't have quite enough. Doesn't happen much with us, but if a market manager is not diligent about checking those things and reminding people that what the rules are, that can happen. So you have to watch that. We need to make sure that the permits are visible. We need to look and make sure that every canopy has weights on it. That's required by insurance, and it's also required just to be safe so that people are not having canopies fly around when weather happens. Dealing with weather is something that we deal with on an almost everyday basis. It's either going to be too wet, or it's going to be too cold, or it's going to be too dry, or it's going to be too windy, which is the real enemy of anybody doing business in tents. So we're watching for that, and we're checking weather relentlessly and refreshing that weather app, having people bring down tents if it gets too windy so that they're not providing a safety hazard. We're setting up our info booth so that we can process EBT sales for people. We're answering shoppers' questions. If there's a vendor that's out, we're trying to point them to another farmer that will have what they need. We're managing lost children. We're looking for lost wallets or things that people might have set down on a booth, and making sure that we connect people with all of their things. Watching for any safety issues. If you're operating in an urban area, sometimes you're dealing with unhoused folks or folks that are having behavioral problems and stress problems, and making sure that they get taken care of. And then we're redeeming EBT, and we're paying the farmers back for the EBT script or tokens that they've taken, and we're balancing that thing out and doing the bookkeeping, and we're coordinating getting those farmers reimbursed ASAP for any script that they took. And then we're doing everything in reverse. We're making sure that you only can have so many people in an aisle to load up their trucks. So we're making sure that people pack up first and then go get their vehicles and then load them back up and get out in a safe way. And in between all that, we're probably talking to folks about what else is going on in their life. So we're checking in with the granola maker whose kid is in the National Little League tournament and seeing how that game is going. And we're checking in with the farmer who's a little bit older, whose wife is ill, and we want to see what her condition is this week. And we're making sure the customers and farmers are getting along. And that's kind of how that day goes.
I mean, it tracks with everything we had when we were at our farmers market in Lexington, Kentucky. Our market manager, Josh, that sounds like his day. And very much all of those little details. And things like you thinking about the wind. I mean, that's one, as a farmer, obviously that is just a nightmare. But as a market manager, it's a nightmare times how many ever people are there. Just the little complications there are immense. And I know that for us, when we were there was doing was those other days was managing all the other markets, which I think is not often seen, from the farmer's perspective or maybe from the customer's perspective necessarily, that like there are other markets and that same manager is running all of those as well, doing that same sort of protocol.
Right. So you have additional markets that you're looking at. And also you've got over time, somebody will retire or somebody will move out of town or somebody will get a quote unquote real job or decide to go into wholesale to sell their product. And so you're constantly evaluating applications so that you can add to your market without throwing it out of balance. So you want to make sure that you've got enough people selling tomatoes that shoppers have choice, because shoppers want choice and farmers and vendors want shoppers. At the same time, you don't want so many people growing tomatoes that nobody's making a good living. So you're constantly trying to rebalance your market as people come and go to make sure that you've got a wide enough variety of products to attract those shoppers, and at the same time not oversaturating any particular category so that everybody who's at the market makes money.
Now, one thing I was thinking is that the Lexington Farmers Market operates as a nonprofit with a board. Is that the typical structure, or are a lot of them for-profit companies?
So there's a lot of different structures. We do see a fair amount that are housed in nonprofits. That's not always the only thing that those nonprofits are doing. In fact, frequently they have other missions that they're working on. And the farmers market piece of it is sort of an umbrella over education, perhaps helping food equity in an area, providing nutrition incentives. When you're in a nonprofit, the main function of the farmers market sometimes is not clearly stated as making sure that small farmers remain financially sustainable, which in my view and the view of many people that define farmers markets, that is the core mission, is to make sure that we support small farmers. And then you add all these other things on as features. In a nonprofit, sometimes the feature comes first. And then as a matter of course, the farmers are making money because they're at the market. But we also see a lot of markets that are run by municipalities. Oftentimes a Parks and Rec employee will be in charge of the farmers market for a city. This happens more often generally in smaller cities, but we see a lot of it. Overland Park, Kansas, the brilliant farmers market manager there that runs a very large market actually works for Parks and Rec. We see that in a lot of cases. And then there are privately owned farmers markets or farmers market businesses that run farmers markets for other organizations. So in my case, for instance, when I'm actively running a farmers market, I'm typically contracting with a business improvement district or a community organization that wants a market in their area, both to activate the area and perhaps sometimes to use as a fundraiser for their organization. My business, though, is strictly for profit. I charge a fee to manage the market. Sometimes there's a split of the net on how the market pans out, if we're getting enough fees to cover everybody's salaries and the porta-john rentals and the insurance and all the things that go with running a farmer's market. So there's a lot of different ways that can be structured.
And I assume there's also probably the occasional cooperative farmer's market. I guess I don't know of any offhand.
Yeah, I was just going to say I missed that one. We just had somebody actually on our podcast not too long ago that's part of a very long-lasting cooperative. We also see a lot of co-ops in Maine. Maine has the largest number of farmers markets per capita of any state. Think about Maine. It's cold. It's a small state. But per capita, they have the most farmers markets of anyone. And almost all of those markets are farmers cooperatives.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me, though, that they have a lot of farmers markets because they have so many farmers there in that area, in that region. I mean,
they have so many farmers.
Yeah.
And when we see markets that are open seasonally because they say there's not enough produce in the winter, we always point to Maine because they do have a fair amount of markets there that are open year round. And so there's farmers growing some things, whether it's root vegetables and what have you. And there's also farmers that preserve things. So you're getting pickles and you're getting relishes and you're getting jams and things that they've done with the produce during the year. I will say that most of the farmers cooperatives that we see nowadays have given up the idea that the farmers themselves should be running the market on a week-to-week basis. And most of them are hiring a manager. And so the farmers themselves, as part of the co-op, kind of each chip in enough to hire a manager to do the social media marketing and the more intense marketing that it seems to take now to get attention with everything going on.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good place for us to take one more quick break. And when we come back, we will get a question about farmers markets from a Patreon member. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show. All right, Catt, we always take a question from our Patreon members, and this one came up recently, and I thought it might be a good one to discuss with you from Songhaven Farm, who wrote, quote, "So just about every market in our region is having some upheaval. One market was told by the local fire department that they did not have enough room to be fire safe compliant, and they'd need to move. Another is being bullied by local commissioners who think the arts and crafts vendors are a competition to downtown stores, and another small town market was considering making drastic changes to its structure till vendors spoke out and decided to leave things the way they've historically been. Is this happening anywhere else in the nation?" I guess this is kind of a question about tensions between markets and municipalities and that sort of thing. Is this something that you're seeing? Is this common? Less common, more common now, those sorts of things?
It's absolutely common. I don't know for sure that it's more common now or if we all just communicate more in the moment than we used to. So this was probably always going on, but there was not social media before. So now we all know about it. But yes, there's definitely always tensions. When we start a new market, oftentimes for us, it's in a business district. And oftentimes, one of the goals there is that the businesses want to see more traffic on the street, more activity in the area. That can be very complementary. I'm coaching a little market in South Philadelphia whose main goal was to kind of create a proof of concept that if you built it, they would come. They have a lot of empty storefronts. They wanted to say, hey, if we put businesses here that were intense once a week and the shoppers came out and kept them going and made it successful for them, maybe people would want to fill those retail spaces. It's actually working exactly like that. But as in any neighborhood, and in this case, there's only one, but there's some business that sees that as competition rather than seeing it as a rising tide floating all boats. And that certainly has been the case in every market I've ever opened. There's either one or two, or there's sometimes a majority of businesses in the area that see those 4 to 6 hour businesses that pop up once a week as maybe not paying as much rent as that guy in the brick and mortar is paying. And why do they get to do business right here in the neighborhood when I've been here for so long? And maybe they're competing with me. So there's always a little bit of tension there. I would say that in most of the cases I've seen, over time, those local businesses see that, yes, the farmers market, if it's doing its job and doing a good amount of marketing and providing a balanced market that attracts shoppers, is probably bringing more people to the area. Those people see those other businesses, whether or not they're eating lunch there right when they're at the farmers market, they're probably coming back a couple of days later because now that they know that business exists. So we see most of those resolve pretty well. When it comes to regulatory agencies, we laugh a lot of times and say that we could run a nuclear plant with less regulatory oversight than we can a farmer's market, because we actually answer to 7 regulatory agencies in the town in San Diego. When we're doing a farmer's market, we have to comply with fire department regulations and we get inspected by them. We have to deal with the traffic department and we get inspected by them and incur a lot of money to hire private security folks to direct traffic because it's a big market. We have to answer to the health department. We not only have to have our own health department permit, but we have to check and monitor every one of our vendors' health department permits. We answer to both the county and the state agriculture departments, and we have to make sure that all of our paperwork is good with them and all of our farmers' paperwork is good with them. The city of San Diego monitors it. So there's a lot of regulatory oversight. And I would say in every place that there's a farmer's market, or at least most places, I can actually think of a couple of states where it's quite a bit looser, but in most farmers market situations, you're dealing with a lot of different regulators. And if a fire department's telling a farmers market that they can't operate because the fire situation isn't good, the best approach is going to be to say, well, what are the fire department regulations that would make this safe? In many places, you have to have a 20-foot aisle because they're saying that that's how much room it takes for a fire truck to get down the aisle. And if you don't, fighting that on the philosophical idea that fire trucks aren't really 20 feet wide is not going to get you far. What you're going to need to do is arrange your site so that you comply with whatever fire department regulations there are. It does happen to everybody. You do occasionally, when you talk about local commissioners finding it a competitive problem, every once in a while you've got somebody in a city or local government that just doesn't like farmers markets. They just think that things should be in regular buildings and that popping up a few hours a week isn't fair to somebody else. Or in one case that we've seen not too long ago, and this was a truly horrendous case, the guy that was on the local city council board wanted to run a farmer's market himself. And he did everything possible to push out the existing farmer's market and take over because he saw it as a successful enterprise. He didn't expect it to be successful when it started. Once it was, he just kind of had designs on taking it for himself. That's an extreme case, and it's not something we'd see too much, but definitely it comes up. There is a bright side. There actually are a lot of communities and a lot of municipalities that, if approached with some data and with some information on what the economic impact can be of farmers markets in a community, are extremely supportive. So we actually are seeing in some places farmers markets that are set up in parks being able to take the data of what kind of sales those markets are generating, how many people they employ, what kind of effect that has on the local community, because most farmers market income stays local. It doesn't go to a headquarters halfway across the country. And they're taking that kind of data into their city government and saying, hey, weather has gotten extreme. This is going to affect us down the road. Can you help us build a pavilion? Not necessarily a building, but a covering of some kind that will help the farmers market operate when weather is severe. And they're getting support for that. And I think the key to that is to really keep track of your numbers, make sure you're collecting data and can put together a proposal. We've seen a lot of city and county governments really responsive to folks who do that.
That's very cool. And the thing that you brought up about like a sort of single person sort of derailing or trying to take over, in that case, like a market, it reminded me kind of what we were talking about in the second segment about the market manager, in this case, being a part of a board, and the board having tensions with who they want to keep out or specific people wanting to be on the board. Is there a lot of that in terms of that sort of conflicts that you see?
Yeah, and we really advise market managers for that reason to get all of that stuff cleared up, discussed, agreed upon, and in writing before they start. Because that's exactly what will happen. You'll all of a sudden have a really successful baker at your market, and the bakery 3 doors down that thought the farmer's market was a fine idea suddenly doesn't. They see that as competition. So we actually had that situation. We refer to it way back. It was 15 years ago. We still refer to it as the Macaroon Massacre, where we had a baker that didn't like it. It took us a long time to fight through, but the good news was we had put in our contract that we had absolute control over vendors and that there could be no exclusionary policies related to the farmer's market, because it's a very slippery slope. If the baker doesn't like your bakery and says, oh, you can't have bakeries there, that means the next guy down is going to be somebody that sells beverages in his little convenience store and doesn't want beverage vendors and lemonade stands there. And then it's going to turn out that there's another shop that actually does have one little stand of produce in their processed food sort of retail store and they don't want tomatoes there. And it's, that slippery slope goes fast if you start letting people decide what kind of vendors you should have.
Well, Catt, this has been brilliant. Will you tell us a little bit about how people can follow your work?
Sure. You can go to Farmers Market Pros. We're online every week with Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. And we have a new platform that just started actually this week called Farmers Market Forum. If you go to farmersmarketforum.com, we have moved our newsletter over to Substack so that we can hold conversations based on those newsletters, as opposed to just reading. You can actually chime in. It's a good spot for that. And we'll also be offering some more online webinars and Ask Me Anything kind of calls at that platform. So farmersmarketforum.com is actually probably going to be the most active way to find us for a little bit here.
Well, that is great. I love Tent Talk. We will make sure to put all of those in the show notes. Catt, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I love the work that you do.
Well, thank you. All right, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Again, all the links of how to follow Catt's amazing work are in the show notes. Huge shouts to Catt for all she does. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a 501c3 nonprofit, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of June, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Patrick Weaver. All right, so continuing on in our story, one of the little girl's favorite things to do in the garden is to pretend she's a bunny, like a bunny rabbit. She will quietly crawl around and hop around on the pathways, nipping at little lettuce here or eating a little pepper there and then a cherry tomato. To be honest, she doesn't really know what bunnies eat or how they eat, but she'll sit there with her cherry tomato and stare up at the sky, kind of munching on it. She likes the moon and all the craters on the moon. She likes to stare at the stars, and especially this night, there are a lot of shooting stars, as her mom calls them, hundreds. They shoot across the sky, then boom on the ground, somewhere seemingly somewhat far away, and her mom smiles, holds up one finger to her lips, then her hands behind her head, like little bunny ears, and then she waves, and then she returns to harvesting the tomatoes quietly, hopping from plant to plant like her daughter. Anyway, we'll continue on this story tomorrow. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you then. Bye.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Nicole Byer, helping you make those rooms flyer. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild! Like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Ooh, fierce! This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.